Good evening, everybody. It's about 6 p.m. Eastern Time on September 13th, 2021. I'm Lisa Salberg. I'm the founder and CEO of the Hypertrophic Cardiomyopathy Association. It is my absolute pleasure this evening to bring you a brief webinar via Facebook and to be podcast on Tales from the Heart regarding a clinical trial called Improve-HCM. And the sponsor of this trial is Imbria Pharmaceuticals. Tonight, we are pleased to have with us representatives from Imbria, as well as principal investigator from NYU Langone, New York, to explain a little bit about the trial. And I am going to, we got phone calls going on here. HCMA business never ends. Okay, so we have a number of individuals joining us this evening. We have a couple of representatives from Imbria. I may have missed a couple of names because they came in a little bit later. But before we begin, I want to give some disclosures. The HCMA is presenting this information on a clinical trial that we are currently assisting in recruitment for. And we have a couple of other people joining us, guys. We at the HCMA will be acting in the capacity of recruitment assistance through a survey-based tool, which will be emailed out to our entire list of individuals tomorrow. If you do not get an email from us, it will also be located on our website through a web link where you can participate. This trial is for non-obstructive HCM, and in this presentation, you will learn about the compound under investigation, the inclusion and exclusion criteria, and where you may participate in this trial. Representatives from the company sponsor, Imbria, are online with us to address your questions. This is a presentation intended for informational purposes only. We encourage you to speak to your individual healthcare provider and your HCM team to determine if this clinical trial may be appropriate for you. I would like to give a big shout out and thank you to Dr. Martin Marin, who was supposed to join us here this evening, but flights have left him in the air during presentation time unexpectedly. And we have Dan Massara from NYU who has jumped in at the last minute to save the day and to provide that particular talk. I'm going to stop my screen share here for a minute, and I'm going to introduce you to tonight's presenters and members of their team. I would like to start with Jai Patel, Dr. Jai Patel, who is the Chief Medical Officer for Imbria, and he will introduce us to his team. Jai?
Great, thank you, Lisa, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining the call. We truly appreciate you taking the time to attend today. Please allow me to introduce myself and my team. So I'm Jai Patel. I'm the Chief Medical Officer for Imbria. I've been in the cardiovascular drug development area for the last 25 plus years. I'm very much looking forward to working with HCMA and yourselves. First member of my team is Paul Chamberlain. Paul?
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name's Paul Chamberlain. I'm the head of clinical development at Imbria. And like Jai, delighted to be having the opportunity to talk to you about our study tonight. So thank you. Should be fun.
And then from the University of Oxford, we have Arash Yavri. Arash?
Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with HCMA. I support the clinical development program at Imbria and very excited to discuss the trial with you all this evening.
And from CCSF, we have Carl Lodenstein. I'm not sure if Carl is able to speak, but that's the name you see on the screen. So Lisa, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you very much. Dan, you want to give an introduction and tell everybody how you got roped into tonight's event?
Sure. Let me start sharing my screen.
I'm going to not have you share your screen yet. Just a little
Okay.
intro so everybody knows where you're coming from.
Oh, okay. So I'm Daniel Massara. I'm part of the HCM program at NYU in New York. And Lisa called me a couple hours ago and asked me to fill in and present a few slides on non-obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you so much for pinch hitting for Marty on this one. We really appreciate it. I am going to now play a pre-recorded piece that was done by the Chief Medical Officer for, Chief he's Chief Scientific Officer, I guess, for Imbria. I said that all wrong, I'm sorry. Michael Furneaux, who I've actually known for almost 23 years. I'm going to read a little bio so you know who you're going to be hearing from. Dr. Furneaux is a clinical scientist specializing in heart muscle disease. He was a British Heart Foundation professor of cardiology and subsequently was the Regis Professor of Medicine in Aberdeen and the Dean of Norwich Medical School. His research focused on the underlying mechanism determining symptoms in heart muscle diseases such as HCM, including cardiac energetic impairment, and he has investigated the role of agents to alter cardiac metabolism. Currently, he is the head of the National Academic Health Services for the state of Qatar, and he is the Chief Scientific Officer for Imbria. Now I got it all said properly. I'm going to do a screen share here, and we're going to hear from Dr. Furneaux. Okay, and
ladies and gentlemen, I've been asked today to briefly explain the rationale for the use of IMB-1 to improve symptoms in patients with non-obstructive cardiomyopathy. So the heart is a truly astonishing pump. One thinks that it pumps, even at rest, around 5 liters of blood every minute for the whole of our lives, and can massively increase that to perhaps 20 liters a minute during exercise, and does so without problems throughout the whole of our lives. One can understand that to do so, it requires a huge amount of energy. And that energy is generated in little organelles within the heart muscle cells known as mitochondria. And these burn substrates, fats and sugar mainly, to generate a molecule called ATP, which is the energy supply for all the cell functions. But the ATP is short-lived. And so in order to both store this energy, but also to transport it from the place where it's made in mitochondria to the place within the cells where it's used, ATP combines with a molecule called creatine to produce a molecule called phosphocreatine, which transports the energy to the site of use. And at the site of use, the ATP is tubed off. Every day of our lives, it's been calculated that the adult human heart cycles at least 6 kilos of ATP. And it does so by burning substrates, as I mentioned. And in fetal life, that's mainly glucose and lactate. But the adult human heart typically generates about 70% of its ATP from fatty acids, but it's what's called a metabolic omnivore. It can adjust the source of its energy according to particular circumstances. We can assess in patients the energy status of the heart using an MRI technique called phosphorus spectroscopy. An energetic impairment manifests as a reduction in the ratio of this molecule phosphocreatine to ATP. And I think the best way to understand that is that phosphocreatine is both a transport and a storage medium for energy. And the ATP is the immediate source of energy. So it's rather analogous to the checking account and savings account that we have in our bank. So we all try to live on less than our income and to put money aside in our savings account. But sometimes our expenses become greater than our income. And the only way we can do that is by eating into our savings account to keep our checking account from going into the red. Well, in the same way, if the heart is not generating enough energy to meet its needs, the only way that it can maintain the immediate source of energy is to eat into its savings, into its phosphocreatine. So this explains why the phosphocreatine to ATP ratio becomes reduced. And we know from many studies now that the phosphocreatine to ATP ratio is pretty much universally reduced in patients with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And importantly, we know that even when we study patients very early in life, before they've developed hypertrophy, they manifest this reduction in energy status. So why is this? Well, in around 60% of patients with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a mutation can be identified in a number of different proteins. And the vast majority of these are proteins involved in what's called a sarcomere. And the sarcomere is the basic contractile unit in muscle, including heart muscle. And there are several different proteins involved in sarcomere. These are shown here. They include actin and myosin, but also others like troponin, tropomyosin, and so on. And hypertrophic cardiomyopathy has been found to be due to mutations of any of a number of these different proteins. And the purpose of the sarcomere is to cause the contraction and the relaxation of the heart. And this occurs due to a sliding of the actin and myosin filaments, with the actin sliding over the myosin through a ratchet-like effect. I'll show you that in a moment. So this is the myosin and this is the actin. And a cross bridge forms, which requires energy, ATP. And it actually causes a power stroke, which moves the actin along. And that process, that ratchet process, each ratchet of that process requires the use of ATP. And we know that these abnormal sarcomere proteins result in an increased cycling of these cross bridges between the myofilaments, and that increases the energy cost of generating force. So it effectively wastes energy. And some theoretical calculations based on some work in experimental models suggest that that increased cost results in about a threefold increased requirement of energy to generate the same amount of tension. So in addition to this direct effect of the mutations in HCM, many patients with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy have abnormalities, that's to say thickening of the small blood vessels within the heart muscle. And these can limit the blood flow to the heart and result in reduction in oxygen delivery and indeed reduction in delivery of substrates. So what are the consequences of this energetic impairment? Well, the first is ion channels. These are little channels in the cell membrane and in membranes within the heart muscle cell itself, which transmit ions across them. These require large amounts of energy. So impaired energetics impairs the function of these ion channels. In particular, this leads to an increase in the calcium levels within the cell. And that increased calcium activates pathways that lead to the development of thickening or hypertrophy of the heart. And in experimental models, it appears that this appears to be the principal cause of hypertrophy in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And an increased cellular calcium also may increase the likelihood of rhythm disturbances of the heart. But particularly importantly for the purposes of what we're going to be discussing today, relaxation of the heart requires very large amounts of energy. And when we exercise, when the heart rate increases, the heart must relax much faster than it does at rest. And that requires vast amounts of energy. And because the heart has not enough energy, it can't do so. So we and others have shown that the principal cause of exercise limitation in patients with non-obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy is that the heart just can't relax fast enough on exercise. So its output is blunted, and that prevents sufficient blood flow to the muscle in order to be able to exercise to a normal level. So how can we impact on this in a positive way? Well, one way is to alter the heart's metabolism in order to improve the efficiency of energy generation. And I mentioned at the beginning that the principal substrates used to generate energy are fats and sugar, and that in adult life, fats tend to be the principal substrate. Well, it turns out that it's more efficient to use sugar than to use fats. And again, to choose an analogy, on the right-hand side, I'm showing you a figure, which is the fuel consumption of two Land Rovers, which are driving across Africa. One is diesel, and the other is petrol. So the diesel is this one here, and the petrol is in blue. And you can see that at every stage of the journey, the petrol vehicle is using more fuel, more gasoline, than the diesel is consuming of the diesel at each stage. So the diesel is more efficient in terms of delivering the mileage of the vehicle. Well, in the same way, using sugar is more efficient in terms of generating energy. And partially inhibiting the use of fatty acids by the heart, we know reciprocally increases the amount of glucose that's used, and therefore it improves the efficiency of energy generation. So would this work in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy? Well, we have a proof of concept. We previously undertook a study evaluating the use of a drug called Hexlene in patients with non-obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Hexlene is a drug that actually inhibits the uptake of fatty acids into these organelles called mitochondria, and that results in a reciprocal increase in the use of sugar, the use of glucose. And this was a randomized controlled trial, placebo-controlled, and you could see we looked at the energy status of the heart. This is the placebo group, this is the Hexlene, and you could see that on Hexlene there was a substantial increase in phosphocreatine ATP ratio, indicating that it improved the energetic status. And not shown here for lack of space, but we also showed that on exercise, this resulted in a marked improvement in the rate of relaxation of the heart. But from a patient perspective, the key thing was that this improved exercise capacity. We measured exercise capacity using a technique called PPO2. And there was a highly significant improvement in exercise capacity. And this was associated with improvements in quality of life. So the drug was effective. The difficulty is that Hexlene has very variable metabolism, that there are various genetic differences in the enzyme that metabolizes it, resulting in markedly different blood levels for the same dose. So in order to use this drug safely, you have to do blood levels and adjust them. So this is clearly an impediment to the widespread use of the drug. So how does IMB-101 work? Well, in many ways, in a very similar way. IMB-101, rather than preventing the uptake of fats into the mitochondria, actually prevents the oxidation of these fats. And by doing so, it reciprocally increases the use of glucose, shown by the thick blue line here. So there is an increased flux through this glucose oxidation pathway and a reduction in fatty acid oxidation. So IMB-101 is a partial inhibitor of the oxidation of fatty acids. That reciprocally shifts cardiac metabolism towards oxidation of glucose and increases the efficiency of generating ATP. And importantly, we know that the drug is well tolerated and it doesn't have the problems associated with Hexlene with variable metabolism requiring drug levels and dose titration. So in summary, IMB-101 is an agent that alters the fuel that the heart uses to generate energy. That results in an improved efficiency of energy generation. And therefore, we are testing the hypothesis that that results in an improvement in energetics and an improvement in symptoms and exercise capacity. Thank you for your time.
Well, that was a very detailed and comprehensive explanation on a very complex pathway that may or may not go over the heads of some individuals. So I wanted to take it down to the patient experience and talk a little bit about who this is entitled for, or who this trial is looking to recruit, and figure out how well we can get the right patients to the right trial at the right time to see if this hypothesis is proven out. Dan, you want to share your screen now, and you can come off of mute, and you can talk a little bit about who this is intended for.
Perfect. Can you see my slides?
We can see your slides.
Wonderful. Okay. So thank you, Lisa, and thank you, colleagues, for the opportunity to present Marty Maron's slides. And thank you all for attending this webinar. So these are obviously very big shoes to fill for me, Marty. If you're listening, I hope you get home safely and without any further delays. And I will try to hopefully say what you had intended. So when we usually give talks about hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, we spend the bulk of our allotted time speaking about left ventricular outflow obstruction, since this is the main mechanism of symptoms and is responsible for a high burden of symptoms. At the same time, we usually don't talk enough about non-obstructive HCM, the subject of today's event. So when we evaluate patients with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and symptoms, where symptoms are exercise intolerance, shortness of breath, chest discomfort, or fatigue with exertion, we first have to exclude left ventricular outflow obstruction from systolic anterior motion of the mitral valve. Usually we do this with echo, maneuvers, a treadmill, amyl nitrate, or even by invasive heart catheterization. So while only about a third of people who live with HCM have obstruction at rest, another third have provocable obstruction. So after doing a thorough job ruling out obstruction in symptomatic people, we're facing a diagnosis of non-obstructive HCM. And in this case, symptoms can be from diastolic dysfunction, so the inability of the heart to relax and fill with blood, extensive fibrosis or scarring of the left ventricle with high filling pressures, microvascular dysfunction, so coronary disease in the smallest coronary arteries inside the heart muscle, and an imbalance between oxygen supply and demand, so overall a net lack of oxygen. What is the clinical significance of this? So people who are diagnosed with non-obstructive HCM are at risk for developing symptoms in the future if they don't yet already have symptoms. So in this particular study, over a follow-up time of about 6 years, about 30% of people developed symptoms. So New York Heart Association class 2 to 4 symptoms, exercise intolerance, chest discomfort, and so on. And these symptoms are unfortunately not so straightforward to treat. So we try beta blockers, verapamil, calcium channel blockers, diuretics, nitrates in a small subgroup of people where the heart muscle is very thick and the cavity is small. Septal myectomy can help in very select cases. And if quality of life is so severely impaired, heart transplantation can be on the table. So there is clearly a very significant unmet need here. And in my clinical practice, there is a substantial proportion of people who live with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy and who have symptoms that we're currently unable to really fully address. And I'm personally very excited about being part of the team introducing this important trial and about being one of the site investigators for a new drug with a goal to enhance cardiac energetics and efficiency. And the goal of this initiative is to improve symptoms, to make quality of life better. So to make people who live with non-obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy feel and function better. At the same time, the goal is to make a safe drug. So what is this IMPROVE-HCM study all about? This is a phase 2 clinical trial, and we're randomizing people to this new treatment or to placebo, a sugar pill. And the study period is going to be around 12 weeks. It includes a screening visit and then 12 weeks on drug, and then another visit 2 weeks after the end of treatment. So in total, it will be 5 visits over a 16-week period, and a number of tests will be done at these visits at the center as part of this study. So what are key inclusion criteria? So the age group that we're looking for is between 18 and 75 years. Obviously, there needs to be a diagnosis of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy with left ventricular wall thickness of at least 15 millimeters or at least 13 millimeters by cardiac MRI in people who have a family history of hypertrophic cardiomyopathy or who have a known pathogenic sarcomeric gene mutation. Since we're talking about non-obstructive hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, at the beginning, at the start of the study, we have to already have ruled out significant left ventricular outflow obstruction. So your LVOT gradient has to be less than 30 millimeters of mercury, both at rest and with provocation. In this case, the treadmill. The left ventricular ejection fraction has to be at least 50%, and interested participants have to be able to perform a cardiopulmonary exercise test on the treadmill. A very important key point is that symptoms have to be present with exertion. So what we call New York Heart Association class 2 or greater symptoms. And according to the cardiopulmonary exercise test, the peak VO2, so what you're able the amount of oxygen you're able to extract from your blood has to be impaired. On EKG, there has to be sinus rhythm. So it cannot be atrial fibrillation at screening and at baseline. So what are important exclusion criteria? So if the blood pressure is too high, it cannot be enrolled. Within 6 months prior to screening, there cannot have been any septal reduction procedure. So if you've had a surgical myectomy or an alcohol ablation, this has to have happened more than 6 months before enrollment. Any significant aortic or mitral valve disease cannot be present. If there is an infiltrative or storage disease, such as Fabry or Danon amyloidosis, in conditions that we know can mimic HCM, shouldn't be present. If there is a history of sustained ventricular tachycardia, that's not a good idea. And any ICD shocks that were appropriate in the prior 6 months, or unexplained fainting spells in the prior 6 months, are also a key exclusion criteria. If there is a known history of obstructive coronary disease, so substantial blockages in the coronary arteries, or a history of a heart attack, that's an exclusion criteria, and significant lung disease is also we're not able to enroll. A history of atrial fibrillation is okay as long as the last known episode is longer than 6 months ago. So in summary, this is my take-home message, is that this is a population of people living with non-obstructive HCM that is underserved, and people whose symptoms we are currently not doing a great job of treating. So we are in need of new and effective treatments. And if you're interested and eligible for the IMPROVE-HCM study, please consider contacting the HCMA to get more information. And I'm more than happy to answer any questions during the Q&A.
Fantastic. Marty would be proud. You presented his slides very well. Thank you very, very much. Okay, so we've already got a couple questions popping in here, and I'm going to encourage everybody who's watching on Facebook right now to populate their questions. If you are watching this broadcast or you're listening to the podcast after the live presentation, you are always welcome to send your questions to us at the HCMA using support@4HCM. That's the number 4HCM.org. So support@4HCM.org will get you to us and we'll answer your questions. The reason why we're waiting to launch the survey until tomorrow is we're going to put the copy of this presentation in the information we're sending out so that those who would like to actually watch the whole presentation can do so before they actually fill out the survey. So we have one question coming in regarding side effects of beta blockers. So, and how that might play in here. So a mom of a 23-year-old is writing that her son's on beta blockers. They cause depression and fatigue. Will this new agent also cause the same side effects as beta blockers? Can somebody speak to what the potential side effects of IMB 101 might be, or do we know? Jai?
Yes, thank you for the question. So the drugs which are currently existing, like beta blockers, act on the hemodynamic system. So they work to slow the heart down. IMB 101 doesn't have any hemodynamic factors or effects, and therefore it can be dosed with beta blockers or on its own without those types of effects. At this stage of development, we're fairly early on, right? We've completed our phase 1 studies. This is one of the 3 studies which we started in patient groups. And as a result of this study, we'll get to understand more about the drug.
Fantastic. So we're getting some questions as to where people can participate. I know there's one UK site and there are a number of US sites. Does somebody want to list those off?
Yeah, so
I asked you.
yeah, so I have the list in front of me. So the UK site you mentioned is in Oxford, and we're doing a portion of the study in Oxford that'll have the scanning component of measuring with an MRI the cardiac energetics. They will also do the CPEX and the exercise tolerance test, which will be done at the US sites. So the US sites are Oregon Health Sciences in Portland, UCSF in San Francisco, Tufts Medical Center, Dr. Maron's site in Boston, Northwestern in Chicago, New York Langone in New York, the Atrium Sanger Heart and Vascular Institute in Charlotte, North Carolina, and WashU School of Medicine in St. Louis.
So it's not quite as open as some of the other trials that our patient population is interested in learning about. We've had up to 20 different sites for some other trials. So this is a little bit more limited. How many patients are you looking to recruit into the study?
So I believe it's 60 patients into the entire study. And then we'll keep an eye on it as this trial progresses. Halfway through, we will do an interim analysis to make sure that the trial is kind of powered and to kind of give us the result we're looking for. So the number may then go up a little bit if necessary.
Okay, so this is a move. And I understand there are some travel stipends available if people must travel into a center. And those are center specific, if I'm correct in my memory.
Yeah, and I'll hand it over to Paul, who's a bit closer to the
Logistics.
Yes, so absolutely. We don't want travel or overnight stays perhaps to be a barrier to folks that are interested and eligible for the study. So we're very much working with each center and through each center to reimburse for normal acceptable travel charges. So oftentimes centers, have hotels on campus, and we'll work through them to reimburse for travel. So
that shouldn't be a hindrance for somebody if it's a little bit further away.
Correct.
Are there exclusions to trial participation based on underlying medications that they may be already on?
I can take a shot at answering this. For the general drugs that Dr. Macera mentioned that folks with HCM are on, that is not a barrier. There are a couple of drugs that are used mainly in Europe that are barriers. Perhexline, which Dr. Furneaux mentioned earlier, that would be a barrier, but that's outside the US. Ranolazine is another drug that might be a barrier. And the barrier is just the timing. If you were actually on a drug, it potentially, in the past, the time since you last took it is an important consideration. So it's not, if you ever took it, you are disqualified forever. So it's something you would certainly check with your investigator.
Fantastic. Tang has a wonderful question, and I'm not surprised because he's a bright little guy there. is this molecule specific to the heart, or will it affect metabolism in other organs as well? If so, what are the potential side effects? I have really smart people out there. Jai, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so primarily this is designed to work on the heart, but there is scientific reason that it may actually work also in the mitochondria in the muscles, right? One thing, as you find out more about the trial and the drug, is that one of the metabolites of this drug is actually an approved drug in Europe and has been approved for the treatment of angina for over 40 years, right? So there's an extensive sort of safety database on those things. So the doses which have been approved with the by the European Union, you know, we're beyond the normal things like headaches and whatnot. We're not expecting anything out of the ordinary. Some people may experience flushing as one of the potential side effects of the drug. Again, if you sign up for the trial, you'll be walked through all the, you know, the background of the drug.
Before I go on to other questions, I want to explain process a little bit from the HCMA side. Number one, anybody at any time can go to clinicaltrials.gov and get the direct information and contact a site coordinator at that site. What we're trying to do here at the HCMA is just make it a little bit easier for you to get in touch with those people without jumping through so many hoops. So when you take the survey, if you choose to permit the HCMA to forward your contact information to the site coordinator for the site that you choose, you will have an in-depth conversation with that clinical trial coordinator. They will answer all of your questions, even silly things that you wouldn't think of maybe being worried or concerned about, but you'll be able to ask them any question you possibly want and they will answer it. You should not consent to a trial until every question you have is addressed and answered. And then you move forward with the trial. This is just high level. Here's what we're doing. Here's an opportunity. Let's give you the information so you can learn a little bit more. I've been personally involved in many clinical trials over my life. I have found all of the experiences very rewarding, and my opportunity to give back to the community that's given me so much. We don't get anywhere without trials. We can't learn unless we try. Which I always like the name of trials. We're trying to find better solutions. So if you don't get all your questions answered here tonight and you're still on the fence, but you want to learn more, you can answer the survey that'll be available tomorrow, or you can just go to clinicaltrials.gov and speak to a coordinator that way. We're just trying to make the connection easier. We don't have to be the middleman. How long will a trial be open is a question. My guess would be until all of the slots are full. So it could be a week, a month, a year. That's why we're trying to get people to participate. The faster we get things running and you power this up with the right number of patients, the faster you can get to answers such as, do we need to bring more patients into the trial for the additional power, or do we have ample data? So there's no close date. We're just opening this right now. But I would recommend, if you think you might be interested, to have the conversation earlier than later, because there's nothing more frustrating than wanting to be in a trial and having it close. So that we don't want to see you to have that happen. Would my 20-year-old daughter have to live in the city with the trial? No. Len, good question. Best case scenario, tie Lyme to commercial use via prescription. This is a trial. This is not being submitted to the FDA at this moment in time. We are so far away from an endpoint. I will give it to Jai and Paul to comment on, or anybody else who wants to. What do you hope a timeline would be if this all works out?
That'll be a tough question. So if this trial again takes a year, 18 months, it really depends on the recruitment. The next stage would be to sit down with the FDA to design the next trial, which we hope will be the pivotal, definitive, larger, fully powered trial. And those will depend on the size of what we agree, what the endpoints are, and then how many, the sort of specific size and construct of the trial. So it's difficult to just give a timeline, but it could be, something we have to work with the FDA to work through.
Let's take a step back for everybody. If we all jump in and think everybody understands phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. So give us an outline. What is a phase 1 study? What is the Wikipedia definition?
So sure. So in general, you start off any of these studies for investigational medicines in what's known as phase 1, which is healthy volunteers. And in the healthy volunteer, you're trying to explore a dose range, how well the drug is tolerated, and you have some initial safety parameters. Once you pass phase 1, then you move into
Jai, we lost your audio there for a second.
Oh, can you hear me?
I don't know what happened. Zoom is not my friend today.
Can you hear me now?
Paul, do you want to try?
Sure, I'll try. I can hear Jai at the moment, but
Jai, you want to try again?
Yep. Hi, can you hear me now?
Now I can. I don't know what happened.
So phase 2 is when you then move into the patient studies. And this is one of the early stage phase 2 studies where you, typically you now know sort of the doses you want to investigate, and you look at endpoints. So in this particular case, we're looking at symptoms, we're looking at sort of exercise testing. And then in phase 3, you then do the trials required by the government for licensing and registration, which tend to be bigger versions of phase 2, but all the information we gather from phase 2 helps us to design phase 3, right? So it's kind of done in sequential. And then after approval, you may have additional studies that are required for long-term safety monitoring. Those are known as phase 4 studies.
So this is not the beginning of the process, but it's early in process. Okay, so other questions. How does a COE apply to participate in the study? They're not accepting any additional sites right now. So the sites that exist are the sites that this trial will be done in. There's reasons to try to keep it broad but limited. Clinical trials are really expensive endeavors, everybody. If you're out there as a patient, you don't see the back end of all of the things that have to be done. So in this case, because you're looking for 60 people, you have enough centers that centers don't overpopulate by putting all the patients in from one center, then you have center biases. So there's enough centers at this point. I suspect if we went to a phase 3, we'd probably open it up a little bit wider to get some more trial sites, but not right now. Anything else that I missed on that?
That's absolutely correct.
I would just add, Lisa, that other than going to centers of excellence, we did try to make a geographic distribution so that throughout the country, there might be somewhere relatively close to you. So it's not all northeastern, it's not all southern, it's not all western. It's distributed sort of throughout the US, the sites.
And I will tell the patients who are watching that HCMA has been working with Imbria for several months on this, and we encourage you to bring in some other sites so that it would have a nice, opportunity around the country in different pockets. Not everybody will be in the right location, and given COVID restrictions, et cetera, it may not be really easy for people to travel right now for a clinical trial, but we've made sure that travel was part of the, travel reimbursement was part of the equation here. So we have a good question, not that any of these are not good questions, but Lori, the inclusion and exclusion criteria will be in the survey itself, or you can repeat this video when it's done and you can rewatch it and catch it there as well. We will be posting this over to our YouTube site as well and putting it in other parts of social media so people can get contact to it. Kathy wants to know, were there any unwanted side effects in the phase 1 trial that you saw?
I can take a try at this. So I've been involved in drug development for 20 years, and we always look at efficacy and safety. And efficacy are the things you want the drug to do, and safety are the things you don't want the drug to do. And there's always safety. There's always findings that you will find with any drug. So in our early work, in the phase 1 work, we did see sort of the things that are quite common in phase 1 studies: mild headaches, sometimes upset stomach, sometimes increased urge to go to the bathroom, but nothing dramatic. All adverse events, or most adverse events, were mild or moderate in, how harsh they were. There were no severe adverse events. So as Jai mentioned, we're very early in the process, but that's what we see so far. So.
Okay, that answers that. Susan, I'm going to take all of your questions and bring them down to one key item in here. She's asking a question about her 15-year-old grandson. The bottom age for this trial is 18, as my understanding is, yes. So unfortunately, this trial would not be open to anybody under the age of 18. In the event that it was seen that it worked in adults, then we could start talking about looking at children, but we never start clinical trials in children when we have adults that we can do that with first. How is the drug different? Okay, I'm not sure I understand this one. How is the drug different from the currently in trial? Things are trying to compare it to a myosin inhibitor. So Dan, you want to take, so we're looking, I think they're asking about myosin inhibitors versus this agent, apples and oranges. Is that the best way to think about this?
I think that's an excellent way of putting this. So there was a trial, a phase 2 trial of mavacamten in non-obstructive HCM, and findings have been published. But mavacamten targets the contractility of the heart muscle, so how vigorously the heart muscle squeezes and interferes with that mechanism. IMPROVE-HCM, the drug doesn't interfere with contractility at all. It interferes with energetics, with the glucose metabolism and the mitochondria, but not with how the heart muscle contracts. Is that fair, Dr. Patel?
Yeah. So an alternative way is that if you think of heart muscle contracting, there are 3 essential components required in everyone, right? You need the actual muscle fibers to be able to contract. You need ions, calcium ions and various other ions, to make sure that the environment surrounding the muscle fibers function adequately. And then you need the source of energy. So as you heard from Professor Freneau's presentation, the heart needs a constant supply. You don't normally store large amounts of ATP, therefore you're making it all the time. So mavacamten works on the cardiac contractility piece directly. Our drug works on the cardiac energetics piece, on the mitochondria.
So she asks a follow-up question, which is quite thought-provoking. If it provides more energy, will it make the heart expire faster?
In theory, not, because what it's doing is there's a lot of wastage of energy in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Again, it's a subtle point, I think, when you go back and rewatch the video, you'll find when Professor Freneau was explaining about the ratchet mechanism and the heart kind of working, it needs almost 2 to 3 times the energy in people with cardiac hypertrophy, right? So you're actually wasting a lot of energy. So by improving that, you'll improve the whole environment, and you would not expect the heart to then sort of stop working faster.
I think some of these questions point to the fact that they're asking really good questions and they're understanding mechanism, and I'm really proud of my people right now because these are all great questions. Diane, EF is 55, non-obstructed. with exercise intolerance. With this drug also, would you explain how AFib relates in this study? Okay, so first, just giving you a little bio on where she's at. And I guess we need to speak a little bit more to the AFib population of the non-obstructives. Are they not in the study? What does AFib mean to improve HCM?
So maybe I can answer this question. So the for those that take the questionnaire or review the inclusion exclusion on clinicaltrials.gov, you'll see the requirements for atrial fibrillation. And the main reason that we have any words about atrial fibrillation is for the CPET examination. So the exercise tolerance test, it's really important that, that you're in sinus rhythm when you do that test. So that's the main reason for any language about atrial fibrillation. So if you've had it in the past, you would discuss that with your doctor. You would be excluded if you're in permanent AFib or at the time of the CPET exam. But that's the reason for addressing atrial fibrillation in this study.
So those with paroxysmal comes and goes AFib, as long as they're not in AFib at the time of the evaluation, they may qualify for the study.
Yes, and there's some, there would be discussion of how often does it occur? And again, it's just pointing to likelihood of it occurring during CPET.
Okay. Here's one I didn't expect. Does having one kidney disqualify you?
Not if you have normal renal function.
So it's more renal function level than whether you're achieving that renal function with one or two kidneys.
Yes, because I mean, the idea, again, there'll be, when you get closer to the study, if there are specific abnormalities, and if on one kidney, you have an elevated creatinine or whatnot, that could interfere with the clearance of not just our drug, but some other drugs.
Yeah.
So at this particular stage, as long as, liver function, kidney function, everything else is normal, that in itself should not be a barrier.
Fantastic. Okay. Somebody's seeing Tufts at the end of the month to be screened. So maybe we have another participant right there. If you've had multiple, I'm assuming, Skipton, you're speaking of ablations for arrhythmias. The question is, if you've had multiple ablations, is that a problem? So I'll ask the question two ways. If they've had radiofrequency ablations for atrial fibrillation, is that exclusion? I don't think so. But what if somebody was obstructed, they had an alcohol septal ablation, they're now non-obstructed? So can you address both forms of ablation in HCM?
This one I have to rely on Dr. Macera because it's getting into quite a specialized area.
As far as I know from the inclusion and exclusion criteria, if you have not had any episodes of atrial fibrillation in the past 6 months, then you can be included. The criteria do not mention a history of radiofrequency ablation. So if the ablation was successful, you're not having any symptomatic episodes in the last 6 months, should be okay.
Good answer. Len asked the follow-up to that Center of Excellence question. He lives in a city with a center that's not participating in the study, was wondering about remote participation, and the answer is no at this time. To my understanding, that no other sites will be added and they can't be evaluated at another center, correct?
Correct, because a critical component of this is the cardiopulmonary exercise testing. And the reason we've kind of selected these 6 or 7 very specialist sites is we've got a central core lab over those sites. So it'd be very difficult if people weren't able, well, it would be impossible to meet the endpoint of the trial because that's a critical component of the setup.
Another great question. If you participate in the phase 2, will you be qualified to participate in the phase 3? Maybe.
Maybe an interesting question. We'd have to kind of consider that on the cases. Typically, you want to not have people who've done repeated pieces of trials, right? But that's an interesting one we'd have to get through once we see all the data. And this is a small population we're dealing with. So I don't want to give an off-the-cuff answer. It needs to be, we need to sit down with Dr. Marin and make sure and the rest of the PIs to kind of consider that.
I think that was an excellent question, Lori, because you stumped us all on that one. Okay. I'm not sure if age is in my favor. Is there a particular age out for this trial?
Yes, it's 75 years.
Okay. What if you're pacemaker dependent? Any inclusion or exclusion criteria regarding heart block?
Yeah, that is a good question. So first of all, I would just preface any answer with there are different devices that folks can have, right? A straight pacemaker, an ICD, et cetera. I would have to defer to the PI's assessment because I don't know the exact answer. I know that appropriate ICD shocks in the prior 6 months would disqualify you. A pacemaker, I am not quite sure. So that's another question that we could get back to you with the exact answer on.
I think some of these questions, as you see, in a clinical trial, case by case has to be evaluated. And this is where that in-depth conversation with a clinical coordinator, going through every line, asking every question. And if there's an unclear area, then it goes back to the entire team and everybody's going to look at it and say, is this profile appropriate for this trial or not? The safety of the individual patient and the integrity of the trial are always foremost in mind when answering these questions. So if we can't answer them right here on the fly, it doesn't mean we don't know or we can't find out. We will get you the answers, and that's how this whole process works. I am one of 40 people who received an implant called AltFlow device when I lived in Philly. It made no improvement, but is still active. Would this exclude me from the trial? Also, I have a pacemaker. I'm not sure what that device is. Again, I think that's an individual question for a coordinator. If you really are looking for something that would improve your quality of life, I think it's worth a conversation. Does anybody know what that device is? AltFlow device? Nope. Talk to a clinical coordinator, please. Do you see this working in conjunction with drugs that affect contractility, such as beta blockers or calcium channel blockers? I'm not sure that I would qualify it as such. Dan, you want to clarify contractility and what beta blockers and calcium channel blockers might do for contractility?
I think the Imbria drug is an alternative pathway to improve symptoms that is unrelated to the known and currently used treatment options. So I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, but as long as you're on stable doses of any other of the currently used medicines for HCM, you're good. We probably wouldn't want you to change doses during the trial period, but that's something to study later on down the road, what the synergisms or antagonisms or good combinations, bad combinations of drug might be, but that's the next step.
So I love the amount of questions. We're going to give this another few minutes because we have a few more coming in. So post your questions right now, and we're going to try to wrap in about 10. Now, we mentioned ranolazine earlier. Somebody here is on ranolazine and finds it very helpful. Is that going to be exclusion for trial participation, being on ranolazine?
So it is, and it's what I mentioned before, there's a time limit. So if it was used in the last month, then you would be excluded. If for some reason the subject discontinued any of the drugs that are exclusionary, after that month, you would be eligible.
Got it. How many actual site visits are required for the patient during the trial?
So I'm going to answer that in two ways. The trial was designed to be flexible. If you think about it this way, there's the beginning, the screening and baseline. There's the end and sort of safety checkup. And then there's a visit in the middle. On both ends, it's quite flexible to allow a patient in the site to either do a couple of I guess, procedures spread it out over a few days, if that's convenient, or more into fewer days. So the exact number, a baseline, let me say 2, 2, 1. So that would be 5 visits, but in the front and back ends, it could be an extra 2 visits if it's convenient to both you, the patient, and the site. Again, the design was to make it convenient for folks.
Not some of the COVID restrictions that we have to deal with.
Exactly.
Yeah, that becomes a bit of a trouble. Marlena, Stanford is not one of the sites, but UCSF is. And I think it's critical to point out something here. If your care is with Stanford and you want to participate in the trial at UCSF, that's perfectly fine. You're not switching your clinical care to a different center. You're just participating in a trial in a different center. And that happens a lot. So you don't have to worry about that part. Is this a daily drug by pill?
Yes.
1 a day?
Twice a day.
Twice a day. 2 pills a day.
1 in the morning, 1 at night.
Okay, morning and night. Gentlemen, I think we've answered all the questions as of this moment, and they were plentiful and they were well thought out. And I'm, again, in all of my community. So I will wrap up this session and just do a little bit of housekeeping here. So we will be taking this session. We're going to be putting it up on our website, and it's going to be on YouTube. You can go to clinicaltrials.gov and look up this trial, or you can wait for the survey to come out and answer the inclusion and exclusion criteria. They are looking for 60 candidates. I know that a few have already been started on this. I know Tufts is already loading. Are there any centers that are not actively ready to take clients at this time?
That's true, yes. And I believe NYU is one of them, which they came on board a little bit later. So I think next month, but it shouldn't prevent people from reaching out.
So if you choose a site that has not started the recruitment yet, you're still going to get the email from us saying we've given your information to the study coordinator. It may be a couple weeks before they get back to you, but the rest of the sites are up and running. So once you fill out the survey with us and say, yes, please send my information, HCMA will be sending information twice a week to the clinical sites, once at the beginning of the week, once towards the end of the week, so that you should hear back within about 10 to 14 days from a study coordinator. Please remember, these are COVID times, and if things shift, there might be a little bit more of a wait for you to hear back from the coordinator. But you will hear back from a coordinator if you are at all qualified and you meet numbers. If we hit beyond our numbers and they don't need any more, you'll get an email from us saying study is being closed, and thank you for your interest anyway. So thank you all for sticking with a pretty heavy conversation for Facebook, but it's the easiest way to get to the masses in the most efficient way possible. And we're hoping that Marty has landed on his plane by now and that he's heading home to his family, and we appreciate him putting the slides together, even though he wasn't here to present them. And to Danielle, thank you so much for helping us. I owe you one. And to our team at Imbria, we're really happy to start this process with you. We're excited for you. We have high hopes for yet another tool in the HCMA toolbox so that we can provide patients with better quality of life. And to all who are watching, thank you for taking your time tonight. And we are going to end the session.